Our Bible word is 2 Corinthians 5, verses 1 to 2. For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation which is from heaven. So here we have Paul. He was on his third missionary journey, and of course he started out at Antioch, then he made his way, ending up in Ephesus. And in Ephesus and its environments, he stayed for a period of around 2 to 3 years. And after this, he went north, he went to Troas, and eventually also went to Macedonia, probably the city of Philippi, maybe he was in Thessalonica. But this, in Macedonia, this area, from here, Paul wrote 2 Corinthians. And we speak probably here around 55 AD, more or less. And what happened just before Paul arrived in Macedonia is that he experienced some life-threatening situation. He was close to death. If we go to 2 Corinthians 1, verses 8, he writes there, "For we do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened beyond measure, above strength, so that we despaired even of life. Yes, we had the sentence of death in ourselves." So Paul is telling you he had some near-death experience. What it was, we do not know exactly. Some scholars suggest he was in prison, maybe in prison in Ephesus. We cannot be sure about this. We can speculate maybe that was he beaten, maybe by the Jews or maybe by Romans? Did somebody try to kill him? Does he maybe speak that he was at a shipwreck? Because later in 2 Corinthians he speaks that he often experienced shipwrecks and he was at sea, afloat at sea for a night and a day, etc. So what happened here, we do not know. But Paul says, I was close to death. I thought I was going to die. And God delivered us from this. Then Paul also, this was a part of his life and ministry where he came to realize that I can die before Jesus returns. In Paul's letters, mostly it's this joyful and eager anticipation the Lord's going to come. He's going to come soon, any moment. And Paul always thought, well, I'm going to be alive when this happens. And now Paul is also coming to grips with the idea, I can die before Jesus returns. Because I was close to death somewhere in Asia, as he says in his writings. So, Paul arrived in Macedonia, maybe in Philippi, maybe in Thessalonica, and he wrote the second letter to Corinth. Roughly, let's say the year 54, 55 AD, something like that. And somewhere in Asia, he experienced this near-death situation. Exactly what it is, we do not know. But now he shares this experience with the people in Corinth. And Paul also explains in 2 Corinthians what it's like to be an apostle. So he explains the nature of the apostle ministry. And Paul says there it's a life of suffering. It's a life of vulnerability, of being persecuted, of being subject to death. And he likens it, especially if we go look to our immediate pericope, that is chapter 4 verses 7 to chapter 5 verses 10, and we can say that's the anticipation of future glory. Before this, Paul speaks of the apostle ministry. It's like it's a ministry of the new covenant. It's a ministry of reconciliation. Apostles are stewards of God's mysteries, etc. But part of this ministry is suffering, and especially in our textual unit. Paul likens the apostles to being these clay vessels, or these clay pots. They crack, they break, they are vulnerable. It's because they are persecuted, they are subject to death. But from within them, it's like there's this light that shines through the cracks. Because through their own suffering, they bring knowledge of Jesus' suffering. And they bring knowledge of Jesus' salvation, or the gift of salvation in Jesus. And they communicate it through their own weakness. Body, or Paul's body, is vulnerable. It's being abused. It's being beaten. It's suffering violence. It's subject to death. As Paul says in chapter 4, verses 12, so then death is working in us, but life in you. It's also interesting what Paul writes in verses 16 to 17. Therefore we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, in other words, the life in the physical body, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. So part and parcel of the suffering as an apostle of Jesus is this wasting away of the body, this abuse of the body, the death of the body. It's actually also part of the whole Christian process. It's part of the Christian story because it's perishing, it's dying. Jesus already destroyed it on the cross because of its sinful nature. And in its place, we look forward, we anticipate this future glory, this glorious resurrection body. So if we can summarize, especially verses 7 to 18 of chapter 4, Paul contrasts there the mortal life with resurrection life. As an apostle, but also as a Christian, the mortal life is like being clay vessels. Clay vessels which are weak and vulnerable, they crack and break. That's our physical body. It's subject to weakness and death. Also, it's temporary and what is seen. But in contrast to this is the future glory of resurrection life. And this is eternal. And this is for now is unseen, but it will be revealed when Jesus returns. And now we also come to our Bible word. Paul again speaks of this contrast. Life in the body versus life in the future body, or life in glory. If we read again, therefore we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, in other words, our physical body, it's temporary, it's like a tent. It's erected here, it's dismantled, it's not something permanent. If our earthly body, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. This refers to our future resurrection body. For in this we groan. In other words, in this temporary earthly body we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation which is from heaven. So again, Paul sets a contrast here, especially from verses 1 to 10 of chapter 5. And he contrasts being at home in the body versus being at home with the Lord. So being at home in the body means to be absent from Jesus. But to be at home with the Lord obviously is to be present with Jesus. And this being at home in the body, he likens to living in the tent. It's our earthly house. It's our physical body. And Paul also speaks of it as being naked. And Paul's here going back to Genesis, where after Adam and Eve sinned, they realized that they were naked. So it's a metaphor for life in the physical body, which is also a life of sin, this living in the sinful flesh. This physical body, our existence in this, is being naked because it's not redeemed, it's not saved. This is a mode of being that is sinful. So Paul likens it to being naked. And in contrast to this also, to that is the building we have from God. It's a house not made with hands. It's a habitation in the heavens, or that comes from heaven. And to receive that resurrection body is to be clothed, or to be further clothed. As Paul also writes there, where mortality is swallowed up by life. So this is Paul. He has experienced this near-death situation, his vulnerability, his life in the body now. They are being subject to death and persecution. It becomes a big thing now for him that he's experienced recently. But also, this vulnerability is the life of an apostle, being persecuted, being beaten, whatever it may be. But also, it's generally part of being a Christian. Our outward man, life in the physical body, is being is being destroyed, and this new glorious life of the resurrection body will replace it. And this is what our Bible text points us towards, this anticipation, this eagerness of looking forward to when our physical body is dismantled, this tent, when we have this building from God, this glorious resurrection body.